The gunshot echoed through the small Wyoming town as Tess Winters clutched her 6-month-old baby to her chest and ran for her life, the hem of her torn dress catching on the rough wooden boardwalk as she fled from the saloon where she'd spent the last miserable year working as a barmaid. It was the spring of 1876, and Tess had nothing but the clothes on her back, her precious daughter Tilly, and the desperate hope that she could somehow escape the clutches of Jeb Morris, the saloon owner who had just murdered a customer in a drunken rage. She'd witnessed the whole thing, and Morris had turned to her with murder in his eyes, leaving her no choice but to run. 22 years old, alone, and with a baby born out of wedlock, Tess had few options in this unforgiving frontier. The father of her child, a smooth-talking gambler who'd promised her the world, had disappeared the moment she'd told him she was with child. Since then, she'd been barely surviving, enduring the leers and propositions from men who thought a woman in her position would do anything for money. As she reached the edge of town, she looked back at the cluster of buildings that made up Broken Creek. Lights blazed in the windows of the saloon, and she could hear shouting. They would be looking for her soon. Adjusting Tilly in her arms, she set off along the moonlit road, not knowing where she was headed but certain she couldn't stay. The cool night air carried the scent of sage and dust as Tess walked. Her thin shoes were not made for long journeys, and blisters were already forming on her heels. Tilly, mercifully, had fallen asleep against her shoulder, her warm breath a constant reminder of why Tess had to keep moving forward. "Just you and me now, little one," Tess whispered, placing a gentle kiss on her daughter's forehead. "We're going to find somewhere safe, I promise." By dawn, Tess was exhausted. Her legs ached, and her arms felt as though they might fall off from carrying Tilly for so many hours. In the distance, she could see what appeared to be a small homestead, a modest cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, surrounded by a split-rail fence. A barn stood nearby and horses grazed in a corral. She hesitated at the road that led to the property. Who lived there? Would they turn her away? Or worse, would they send word back to Broken Creek that they'd seen her? But Tilly was starting to fuss with hunger, and Tess knew she had no choice but to seek help. As she approached the cabin, a tall man emerged from the barn, leading a chestnut mare. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, dusty denims, and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. When he spotted her, he stopped in his tracks, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "That's far enough," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "State your business." Tess stopped, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "Please," she managed to say. "My baby and I need help. We've been walking all night." The man studied her for a long moment, then seemed to relax slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Broken Creek," Tess replied honestly, seeing no point in lying. I had to leave in a hurry." The man's eyes narrowed. "Trouble?" Tess nodded, shifting Tilly to her other arm. "Not of my making, but yes." To her surprise, the man's face softened. He secured the horse to a hitching post and approached her slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. As he came closer, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline and eyes the color of the Wyoming sky. "I'm Zach Harrington," he said, tipping his hat. "This is my place." He glanced at the baby in her arms. "Your little one looks hungry." "She is," Tess admitted. "I haven't been able to feed her properly since yesterday." Zach nodded toward the cabin. "Well, come on in then. My housekeeper, Mrs. Fairchild, is inside with my children. She'll help you get settled." Tess blinked in surprise. "Your children?" "3 of them," Zach said, a shadow crossing his face. "Their mother passed 2 years ago. Fever took her." He cleared his throat. It's just been me and Mrs. Fairchild raising them since." Before Tess could respond, the cabin door flew open and 3 children spilled out onto the porch. The oldest, a boy of about 7, had Zach's blue eyes and serious expression. Beside him stood a girl of around 5 with blonde braids and a missing front tooth. The youngest, a boy who couldn't have been more than 3, clutched a wooden toy horse in his chubby hand. "Pa," the oldest called out. "Mrs. Fairchild says breakfast is ready," and he stopped, noticing Tess for the first time. "Who's that?" Zach gestured toward the children. "Thomas, Tabitha, and Timothy. This is Miss Winters," Tess supplied. "Tess Winters, and this is my daughter, Tilly." The children stared at her with undisguised curiosity. Little Timothy inched forward, peering at the baby in her arms with wide eyes. "Is that a real baby?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Despite her exhaustion, Tess found herself smiling. "Yes, she is. Her name is Tilly." "Children," Zach said, his tone gentle but firm, "Miss Winters and her baby have had a long journey. They'll be joining us for breakfast, and they might be staying with us for a little while." Thomas frowned. "But Pa, you always said we shouldn't trust strangers." Zach ruffled his son's hair. "That's true, son. But sometimes folks need help, and when they do, it's our duty to provide it if we can." He looked at Tess. "Isn't that right, Miss Winters?" Tess felt tears prickling behind her eyes at this unexpected kindness. "Yes," she whispered, "and I'm very grateful." Inside the cabin, Tess was greeted by Mrs. Fairchild, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and capable hands. The housekeeper didn't ask questions, simply taking one look at Tess's exhausted face and the hungry baby and springing into action. "You poor dear," she clucked, guiding Tess to a rocking chair by the fire. "You sit right there with your little one. I'll bring you some warm milk for the baby and a plate for yourself." The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large table in the center of the main room, a stone fireplace, and doorways leading to what Tess assumed were bedrooms. Children's drawings were pinned to the walls, and a collection of books lined a small shelf. It was modest but unmistakably a home. As Tess settled into the chair, Tilly began to cry in earnest, her tiny face screwed up in hunger and distress. Tabitha approached cautiously, watching with fascination. "She's sad," the little girl observed. "She's hungry," Tess explained, gently bouncing Tilly in an attempt to soothe her. Tabitha cocked her head to one side. "Ma used to feed Timothy with a bottle when he was a baby, I remember." Mrs. Fairchild returned with a small bottle of warm milk. "Here you go, dear." "It's goat's milk. We keep a few nanny goats out back. It should do for now." Gratefully, Tess accepted the bottle and began to feed Tilly, who latched on eagerly. The baby's cries subsided, replaced by contented suckling sounds. "You've had quite a time of it, haven't you, Mrs. Fairchild said softly, placing a plate of eggs and bacon on a small table beside the rocking chair. "Eat while you can. You look dead on your feet." Zach entered the cabin with his sons trailing behind him. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He washed his hands at a basin by the door, then joined his children at the table. Throughout the meal, Tess could feel Zach's eyes on her occasionally, assessing, questioning. She knew he must be wondering what kind of trouble had driven her from Broken Creek in the middle of the night, and she dreaded the moment when she would have to explain. After breakfast, Mrs. Fairchild showed Tess to a small bedroom at the back of the cabin. "This was Mr. Harrington's wife's sewing room," she explained. "We've kept a bed in here for guests, though we don't get many out this way." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the rolling hills beyond the homestead. Mrs. Fairchild had already placed a wooden crate lined with blankets beside the bed, a makeshift crib for Tilly. "Get some rest, dear," the housekeeper said. "You're safe here." When Mrs. Fairchild had gone, Tess laid Tilly, now sleeping peacefully with a full belly, in the crate. Then she sank onto the bed, not even bothering to remove her shoes. Exhaustion claimed her immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to the sound of voices outside her window. The sun was high in the sky, suggesting she had slept for several hours. Tilly was still sleeping, making tiny snuffling noises in her improvised bed. Tess moved to the window and peered out. Zach was in the yard with Thomas, showing him how to saddle a horse. The boy's face was serious with concentration as he listened to his father's instructions. Further away, Tabitha was helping Mrs. Fairchild hang laundry on a line, while Timothy played in the dirt with his toy horse. It was such a normal, peaceful scene, a family going about their daily lives. Tess felt a pang of longing so sharp it took her breath away. This was what she wanted for Tilly, a safe place, a normal life, far from the dangers and degradations of the saloon. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Winters," Zach's deep voice called. "If you're awake, I'd like a word." Tess quickly smoothed her rumpled dress and ran a hand through her tangled hair. "Come in," she called softly, mindful of Tilly's sleep. Zach entered, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. He looked uncomfortable in the small, feminine space, his large frame seeming to fill the room. "I hope you got some rest," he said, keeping his voice low. "Yes, thank you," Tess replied. "And thank you for taking us in. I don't know what we would have done if Zach held up a hand. No need for that. Couldn't leave a woman and baby out there alone." He hesitated, then said, "But I do need to know what kind of trouble you're running from. I've got my children to think about." Tess nodded, understanding his concern. "Of course." She took a deep breath. "I worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Broken Creek." "As a barmaid," she added quickly, wanting to make it clear she hadn't been one of the upstairs girls. "Last night the owner, Jeb Morris, shot a customer over a gambling dispute. I saw it happen. Morris saw me watching and I knew." She swallowed hard. "I knew he would kill me too, to keep me quiet." Zach's expression darkened. "Jeb Morris," he repeated. "I know of him, mean drunk with a quick temper." "Yes," Tess confirmed. "And he has friends in the sheriff's office. There would be no justice, not in Broken Creek." "So you ran?" "I had no choice. Not with Tilly to think about." Tess glanced at her sleeping daughter. "Her father left before she was born. It's just been the two of us since then." Zach was quiet for a long moment, digesting this information. "Morris is likely to come looking for you," he said finally. "I know," Tess whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "I won't stay long. Just a day or two to rest, then we'll move on." "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air between them. The truth was, Tess had no plan beyond escaping Broken Creek. She had no family, no friends in other towns, and very little money. "I don't know," she admitted. Zach ran a hand through his hair, seeming to wrestle with a decision. "Look," he said finally, "I can't in good conscience send you and your baby back out there with no protection and nowhere to go. You can stay here until we figure something out." Relief washed over Tess. "Mr. Harrington, I couldn't—" "Zach," he corrected her. "And yes, you can, but there's something you should know." He glanced out the window at his children. "Those kids have been through enough loss already. Their mother dying hit them hard, especially Thomas. He still has nightmares." Zach fixed her with a steady gaze. "If you stay, you need to be honest with them about who you are and why you're here. No pretty stories. They deserve the truth, even if it's not what they want to hear." Tess nodded slowly. "I understand, and I appreciate your honesty." "Good." Zach seemed relieved. "Mrs. Fairchild has prepared a bath for you in the washroom. There are some clothes too, they belong to my wife, but they should fit well enough until we can get you something of your own." After he left, Tess carefully lifted Tilly, who was just beginning to stir, and made her way to the washroom. The warm bath was heavenly, washing away the dust and fear of the previous night. The dress Mrs. Fairchild had laid out was simple but well made. A cornflower blue that complemented Tess's amber eyes and dark honey-colored hair. When she emerged, feeling refreshed and almost like a new person, she found the family gathered around the table for the midday meal. Mrs. Fairchild had prepared a hearty stew with fresh bread, and the children fell upon it with enthusiastic appetites. "You look better," Zach commented as Tess took a seat, Tilly cradled in one arm. "I feel better," she admitted. "Thank you." Throughout the meal, the children peppered Tess with questions about Tilly, about where she had come from and why she was staying with them. With a glance at Zach for reassurance, Tess answered as honestly as she could, leaving out the more frightening details but making it clear that she had fled from a dangerous situation. "So you're hiding from a bad man?" Thomas asked, his young face serious. "Yes," Tess replied. "For now." "Our pa can protect you," Tabitha declared with complete confidence. "He's the strongest man in Wyoming." Zach coughed, looking embarrassed. "I don't know about that, Tabby." "It's true," the little girl insisted. "You can shoot better than anyone and you're not scared of nothing." "Anything," Zach corrected gently. "And that's not true. Everyone's afraid of something." "What are you afraid of, Pa?" Timothy asked, his eyes wide. Zach's gaze flickered briefly to Tess, then back to his son. "Losing the people I care about," he said quietly. A hush fell over the table. Tess could feel the weight of shared grief in the silence, the absence of the woman who had been wife and mother in this household. After a moment, Mrs. Fairchild broke the tension. "Who wants apple pie for dessert?" she asked brightly, and the children's faces lit up with delight. Later that afternoon, while the children napped and Mrs. Fairchild worked on mending, Zach took Tess on a tour of the homestead. The property was larger than she had initially realized, encompassing not just the cabin, barn, and corrals, but also several fenced pastures where cattle grazed, a small orchard of apple trees, and a vegetable garden that Mrs. Fairchild tended with obvious pride. "It's beautiful," Tess said as they stood on a rise overlooking the land. Tilly was awake now, gurgling happily in Tess's arms and reaching out to grab at Zach's shirt when he came close. "It's a good piece of land," Zach agreed, letting Tilly grasp his finger. "Took a lot of work to get it this way. When Sarah and I first came out here, there was nothing but wild prairie." "Sarah was your wife," Zach nodded, his expression softening at the memory. "We were childhood sweethearts back in Missouri. Came out here right after we married, looking for a fresh start. Built the cabin together, planted every tree in that orchard. You must miss her terribly," Tess said softly. "Every day," Zach admitted. "But the hardest part is watching the children grow up without her." Thomas remembers her best, of course. Tabitha has some memories, but they're fading, and Timothy. He sighed. "He was just a baby when she died. He'll never remember her at all." Tess thought of Tilly, who would likewise have no memories of her father, though in her case, perhaps that was for the best. "It's not just the mothering they miss," Zach continued, almost to himself. "It's the little things a woman brings to a home, the touches that make it more than just a place to eat and sleep. Mrs. Fairchild does her best, but she's getting on in years, and she's not their mother." Tilly chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, reaching again for Zach. Without thinking, Tess transferred the baby to his arms. He looked startled for a moment, then adjusted his hold with surprising skill. "You're good with her," Tess observed. Zach smiled ruefully. "I've had some practice." He bounced Tilly gently, making her giggle. "Though it's been a while since I held one this small." Watching him with her daughter, Tess felt something shift inside her, a warming in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. This man, this stranger who had taken them in without question, was kind in a way she had almost forgotten existed. In the harsh world of the frontier, kindness was often the first casualty. "Mr. Harrington, Zach," she corrected herself, "I want to do something to repay your kindness. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of hard work." Zach looked thoughtful. Mrs. Fairchild could use some help with the children and the household chores. She won't admit it, but she's slowing down. Her joints pain her, especially in the mornings. "Then it's settled," Tess said firmly. "While I'm here, I'll help wherever I can." The next few days established a new routine at the Harrington homestead. Tess rose early to help Mrs. Fairchild prepare breakfast before Zach and Thomas headed out for their morning chores. She took over much of the cooking, discovered she had a talent for baking that delighted the children, and spent hours playing with Tabitha and Timothy while still caring for Tilly. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, she would sit with Zach and Mrs. Fairchild by the fire, mending clothes or simply talking. Zach told stories of his early days on the homestead, of cattle drives and encounters with neighboring ranchers. Mrs. Fairchild, who had come west as a young bride herself many years ago, shared tales of frontier life that made Tess both laugh and marvel at the older woman's resilience. For her part, Tess spoke little of her past. The painful memories of her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 16. Her desperate journey west in search of a fresh start. The handsome gambler who had swept her off her feet only to abandon her when she needed him most. These were stories she kept to herself. But as the days passed, she found herself growing more comfortable, more at ease. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she and Tilly had found a safe harbor. The children, too, seemed to blossom with her presence. Thomas, initially wary, began to seek her out, asking for help with his reading lessons or showing her the young calf he was raising. Tabitha followed Tess everywhere, eager to help with Tilly and full of questions about being a lady. And little Timothy, with his chubby cheeks and infectious laugh, would climb into her lap at every opportunity, demanding stories or simply cuddling close. One evening, about 2 weeks after Tess's arrival, she was sitting on the porch with Tilly, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Zach joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Tess and settled into the chair beside her. "The children are in bed?" she asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Finally," Zach confirmed with a tired smile. Timothy insisted on 3 stories tonight, and Tabitha had 1,000 questions about why the sky turns colors at sunset. "And what did you tell her?" "That God paints it different each night so we never get bored looking at it." Tess laughed softly. "A fine answer." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching as the last light faded from the western sky, giving way to the first twinkling stars. "You're good with them," Zach said finally. "The children, I mean, they've taken to you." "They're wonderful children," Tess replied. "You should be proud." "I am." Zach's voice held a note of something regret, perhaps, "but they need more than I can give them alone." Tess turned to look at him, but his face was in shadow now, unreadable in the gathering darkness. "What will you do?" he asked. "When you feel safe enough to leave?" The question caught Tess off guard. She had been so focused on the day-to-day routine of life at the homestead that she had almost forgotten her situation was temporary. The thought of leaving, of taking Tilly away from this place that already felt like home, sent a pang through her heart. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a little money saved, but not enough to start over somewhere new." You could stay, Zach said, his voice careful, measured. Here, I mean. Tess felt her heart skip a beat. Stay, Mrs. Fairchild isn't getting any younger, Zach continued, speaking quickly now as if afraid he might lose his nerve. The children need someone, and Tilly deserves a stable home. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Harrington? Tess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zach set his coffee cup down and turned to face her directly. In the fading light, his blue eyes were serious, intent. I'm proposing an arrangement, a practical one. You stay on as my wife. In name, he added hastily. You'd have your own room, of course. But the children would have a mother figure, and you and Tilly would have security, protection. Tess stared at him, speechless. A marriage of convenience, it wasn't uncommon on the frontier, where survival often depended on such practical arrangements, but something in her rebelled at the idea. After the heartbreak of her relationship with Tilly's father, the thought of entering into another union without love, even one as pragmatic as what Zach was suggesting, felt wrong. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. You don't have to answer now, Zach said, rising from his chair. Think about it. It's a big decision, I understand that. Before she could respond, he had disappeared back into the cabin, leaving Tess alone with her thoughts and the vast, star-filled Wyoming sky. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, listening to Tilly's soft breathing and turning Zach's proposal over in her mind. On the surface, it made perfect sense. She needed a safe haven for herself and her daughter. Zach needed someone to help raise his children. A marriage based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Many frontier couples had built solid lives on less. But as she drifted finally toward sleep, images of Zach filled her mind, his gentle hands as he held Tilly, his patient voice as he taught Thomas to saddle a horse, the rare but transformative smile that lit his face when one of the children made him laugh. She realized with a start that she was beginning to care for him as more than just her benefactor, and that made his practical proposal all the more painful. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching fall. Tess rose early, determined to maintain her composure around Zach despite the turmoil in her heart. But as she entered the main room of the cabin, she found not Zach but Mrs. Fairchild, her face grim. "What is it?" Tess asked, immediately concerned. "Is one of the children sick?" "No, child, the children are fine," Mrs. Fairchild replied. "But there's trouble." Zach rode out at first light. A rider came from town with news. Jeb Morris and two of his men have been asking questions about a young woman with a baby. They're looking for you. Fear, sharp and familiar, lanced through Tess. "How close are they?" The rider said they were in River Cross yesterday. "That's less than a day's ride from here." Tess closed her eyes briefly, trying to think. "I have to leave," she said. "I can't bring this danger to Zach and the children." Mrs. Fairchild placed a firm hand on Tess's arm. "That's not what Zach thinks. He rode to town to speak with the sheriff. Sheriff Tanner is a good man, not in Morris's pocket like the one in Broken Creek. Zach believes you'll be safer here where he can protect you than on the run again. But the children would be heartbroken if you disappeared," Mrs. Fairchild said bluntly. "Especially after what they've already lost. No, my dear, running isn't the answer." Before Tess could argue further, the door burst open and Thomas rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Tess, Pa's back and he's brought the sheriff." Outside, Tess found Zach dismounting from his horse alongside a tall, weathered man wearing a star-shaped badge. The sheriff nodded politely as Zach made the introductions. "Miss Winters, this is Sheriff Tanner from River Cross." "Sheriff, this is Tess Winters and her daughter, Tilly." Sheriff Tanner removed his hat, revealing a shock of silver hair. "Madam," he said respectfully. Zach here has told me about your situation with Jeb Morris. Then you know why I'm concerned, Tess replied, shifting Tilly in her arms. If Morris finds me here, Morris won't find you, Zach interrupted firmly. And even if he did, he wouldn't be fool enough to try anything with Sheriff Tanner involved. The sheriff nodded. Morris is wanted for questioning in 3 counties now, Miss Winters. That killing you witnessed in Broken Creek wasn't his first. I've sent telegrams to the territorial marshal's office, and they're dispatching men to help bring him in. So you see, Zach said, his blue eyes holding Tess's gaze, you're safer here than anywhere else. We just need to be cautious for a little while longer. Despite these reassurances, Tess insisted on keeping the children close to the cabin that day. She helped Thomas with his lessons, showed Tabitha how to make a simple doll from scraps of fabric, and told Timothy stories while Tilly napped. All the while, she found herself glancing nervously out the windows, half expecting to see Morris and his men riding up to the homestead. Zach spent the day patrolling the boundaries of his property, rifle in hand. Sheriff Tanner stayed until mid-afternoon, then rode back to town with a promise to return the next day with news. As darkness fell, Tess helped Mrs. Fairchild prepare a simple supper of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. The meal was quieter than usual, with even the children seeming to sense the tension in the air. After the children were in bed, Tess found Zach sitting alone on the porch, his rifle across his knees. He looked up as she approached, his face weary but determined. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch tonight." Instead of going inside, Tess sat beside him. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said quietly. Zach stiffened slightly. "Now might not be the best time to discuss it." "On the contrary," Tess countered. "This situation has made things clearer for me." She took a deep breath. "I can't accept your offer, Zach, not as it stands." In the dim light from the cabin windows, she saw his jaw tighten. "I see." "No, I don't think you do," Tess continued. "I can't enter into a marriage of convenience with you because—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "Because my feelings for you are not convenient at all. They're complicated and growing stronger every day." Zach turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Tess, please let me finish," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been hurt before. I trusted a man who made promises he never intended to keep. I can't go through that again, especially not with Tilly to consider." "I would never hurt you," Zach said, his voice rough with emotion. "Or Tilly." "I believe that," Tess admitted. "But I also believe that if we were to marry, it should be for the right reasons, not just for convenience or security." Zach was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkened landscape beyond the porch. Finally, he said, "When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to feel." He shook his head. "These past weeks with you here, the cabin has felt like a home again. The children are happier. And I find myself looking forward to each day in a way I haven't since I lost her." He turned to face Tess fully, reaching out to take her hand in his. "I proposed a practical arrangement because I was afraid to admit what I was really feeling. But the truth is, Tess Winters, I'm falling in love with you, and if you need time, I'll wait, however long it takes." Tess felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Oh, Zach," she whispered. "I don't need time. I just needed to know that this was real." In the silver moonlight, their faces drew closer, and when their lips met, Tess felt as though something long broken inside her had finally begun to heal. The peace of the moment was shattered by the distant sound of horses approaching. Zach pulled away, instantly alert, his hand moving to his rifle. "Get inside," he said, his voice tense. "Wake Mrs. Fairchild and tell her to keep the children in their room, no matter what she hears." Tess hurried into the cabin, her heart pounding. She relayed Zach's instructions to Mrs. Fairchild, who nodded grimly and disappeared into the children's bedroom. Through the window, Tess could see 3 riders approaching the cabin, their forms silhouetted against the night sky. One of them, a bulky figure with a distinctive bow-legged gait, was unmistakably Jeb Morris. Zach stood on the porch, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called out. "State your business." "Just looking for a friend of mine," Morris replied, his voice carrying the same slurred menace that had haunted Tess's nightmares. "Pretty girl with a baby. Here she might be staying here." "There's no one here but my family," Zach replied evenly. "You'd best move on." Morris laughed, an ugly sound. "Now that's funny because word in town is you've taken in a stray, and that stray belongs to me." "No woman belongs to you, Morris," Zach said, his voice hard. "And you're trespassing on my property." One of Morris's companions shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Tess gasped, certain she was about to witness Zach's murder. But before any of the men could draw, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the direction of town filled the air. Morris and his men turned, startled, as Sheriff Tanner appeared with 4 armed deputies. "Evening, Morris," the sheriff called out, his voice coldly professional. "I've been looking for you. You're wanted for questioning about the murder of Frank Dawson in Broken Creek." Morris spat on the ground. "Dawson cheated at cards. He got what was coming to him." "That's for a judge to decide," Sheriff Tanner replied. "Now, you and your men drop your weapons, nice and slow." For a tense moment, Tess thought Morris might try to shoot his way out. But faced with the sheriff and his deputies, even he could see the odds were against him. With a curse, he dropped his gun. As the sheriff's men disarmed and handcuffed Morris and his companions, Tess stepped out onto the porch, moving to Zach's side. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Zach put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It's over," he confirmed. Sheriff Tanner got word that Morris was headed this way and brought reinforcements. "Morris will stand trial for Dawson's murder, and with your testimony, he'll hang." Sheriff Tanner approached them, touching the brim of his hat respectfully to Tess. "Madam, we'll need you to come to town tomorrow to make a formal statement. After that, this should all be wrapped up pretty quick." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tess said, her voice stronger now. "I'll be there." After the sheriff and his deputies had departed with their prisoners, Tess and Zach returned to the porch. The night was quiet once more, peaceful under the canopy of stars. "You were very brave," Tess told him, leaning against his solid strength. Zach shook his head. "Not brave, terrified. If anything had happened to you." "But it didn't," Tess reminded him, reaching up to touch his face. "We're safe now." The next morning, after Tess had given her statement to Sheriff Tanner in Rivercross, she and Zach took a walk through the small town. The general store owner, upon learning who Tess was, insisted on showing her a selection of fabrics and ready-made clothes for the brave young lady who helped catch Jeb Morris. As they left the store with their purchases, Zach suddenly stopped in front of the town's small church. It was a modest building with a simple steeple, but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows. "What do you think?" he asked, nodding toward the church. Tess looked at him quizzically. "About the church, it's lovely." "About getting married there," Zach clarified, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Say a month from now, time enough for the banns to be read and for you to be sure this is what you want." Tess's heart swelled with happiness. "A month seems like a very long time," she teased. "But yes, Zach Harrington, I will marry you in that church, or anywhere else for that matter." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. News of Jeb Morris's capture and the forthcoming trial had spread throughout the territory, and to Tess's surprise, several of the other girls from the Silver Dollar Saloon came forward with their own accounts of Morris's cruelty and crimes. With multiple witnesses prepared to testify against him, Morris's fate was all but sealed. Meanwhile, life at the Harrington homestead took on a festive atmosphere. Mrs. Fairchild, energized by the upcoming nuptials, spent hours teaching Tess how to make Zach's favorite dishes and sharing stories of her own long-ago wedding. The children, ecstatic at the news that Miss Tess and Tilly would be staying permanently, threw themselves into wedding preparations with enthusiasm. Thomas, ever practical like his father, spent days helping Zach build in addition to the cabin a new bedroom for Tess and Zach, with a small adjoining room for Tilly. Tabitha appointed herself wedding planner, creating elaborate drawings of how the church should be decorated and practicing her role as flower girl with religious devotion. Even little Timothy contributed, solemnly informing Tess that he would give her away at the wedding since her father couldn't be there. The day before the wedding, Tess stood in the new bedroom, running her hands over the quilt that Mrs. Fairchild and several ladies from town had made as a wedding gift. It was beautiful, pieced together from scraps of fabric in shades of blue and gold, with a center panel that depicted the Harrington homestead. "You like it?" Zach asked from the doorway, watching her with a tender expression. "It's perfect," Tess replied, turning to face him. "Everything is perfect." Zach crossed the room to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "And I'll be the luckiest man in Wyoming." "I think I'm the lucky one," Tess countered, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. 6 months ago I was alone and afraid, with no future for myself or Tilly. Now I have a home, a family, and you—" Zach brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. "It was my mother's, then Sarah's. Now I want you to have it." Inside the pouch, Tess found a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Oh, Zach," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "Sarah would have liked you," Zach said softly. "She would have been glad to know the children were being raised by someone like you, kind, brave, loving." Tess slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "I'll try to be worthy of her legacy," she promised. "And I'll make sure the children never forget her." Zach nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "That's all I could ask for." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a sky as blue as Zach's eyes. The small church in Rivercross was filled to capacity with well-wishers, neighbors from surrounding homesteads, townspeople who had rallied around Tess during Morris's trial, and even a few of the girls from the Silver Dollar who had left Broken Creek for fresh starts of their own. Mrs. Fairchild had outdone herself, transforming Tess's simple blue dress with lace trim and pearl buttons salvaged from her own wedding gown. Tilly, now nearly 9 months old and beginning to take her first tentative steps, wore a matching blue dress that Tabitha had helped stitch. As promised, Timothy walked Tess down the aisle, his small face solemn with the importance of his role. Tabitha scattered wildflower petals with artistic flair, and Thomas stood proudly beside his father at the altar, holding the wedding rings on a small cushion. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Timothy piped up with a clear, confident voice, "I do, and Tabby and Thomas and Tilly too." Laughter rippled through the congregation, and Tess felt her heart might burst with love for these children who had so readily accepted her as their own. The vows were simple, but heartfelt. Zach promised to love, honor, and protect Tess and Tilly for all the days of his life. Tess, her voice steady despite the tears of joy that threatened, promised to love Zach and his children with all her heart, to stand by him through whatever life might bring. when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Zach's kiss was tender but carried a promise of passion that made Tess's cheeks flush. The celebration afterward at the Harrington homestead lasted well into the evening, with neighbors bringing food, music, and good wishes. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the land, Tess found herself standing with Zach at the same spot where, weeks earlier, he had shown her the property for the first time. "Happy, Mrs. Harrington?" Zach asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Tess replied, leaning into his embrace. "Look at them," she added, nodding toward the children. Thomas was showing some older boys how to lasso a fence post, Tabitha was dancing with her friends to the fiddle music, and Timothy was fast asleep in Mrs. Fairchild's lap, exhausted from the day's excitement. Tilly, too, had succumbed to sleep, cradled in the arms of one of the neighboring women. "They're flourishing," Zach observed. "Because of you, because of us," Tess corrected him. "We make a good team, Mr. Harrington." "That we do, Mrs. Harrington," Zach agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That we do." As the last guests departed and the children were tucked into bed, Tess and Zach found themselves alone at last in their new bedroom. The oil lamp cast a warm glow over the space, turning everything golden and dreamlike. "I never thought I would find love again," Zach said, drawing Tess into his arms. "After Sarah died, I focused all my energy on the children on the ranch. I told myself that was enough." "And was it?" Tess asked softly. Zach shook his head. "No, I was existing, not living." "Then you arrived with Tilly, and suddenly there was laughter in the house again, and warmth and hope." He cupped her face in his hands. "You saved us, Tess, all of us." "You saved me first," Tess reminded him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "When you opened your door to a desperate woman and her baby, when you said those words that changed everything." "What words?" Zach asked, his voice husky. Tess smiled, remembering the moment that had given her hope when she'd had none. "When you looked at Thomas, Tabitha, and Timothy, then at me and Tilly, and said my kids could use a mama." Zach laughed softly. "Best thing I ever said, apparently." "Indeed it was," Tess agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And now I'm their mama and you're Tilly's papa, and we're a family." "A family," Zach repeated, the word filled with promise and love. "That's all I've ever wanted." As moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns across their bed, Tess and Zach sealed their vows with kisses and whispered promises, finding in each other's arms the love and passion they had both thought lost forever. 1 year later, Tess stood on the porch of the Harrington homestead, watching as Zach taught Thomas the finer points of breaking a young horse. The boy, now 8, had grown inches in the past year and was showing signs of becoming as skilled a horseman as his father. In the garden, Tabitha was helping Mrs. Fairchild gather vegetables for dinner, chattering away about her school lessons and the upcoming harvest festival. Timothy, nearly 5 now and full of boundless energy, was chasing butterflies across the yard, his delighted laughter carrying on the breeze. Tilly, at 18 months, was toddling around the porch, babbling happily as she explored. Her dark curls and amber eyes were the image of Tess, but her determined spirit reminded everyone of Zach. And in Tess's arms, barely 3 months old, slept the newest addition to the Harrington family, little Zachary Jr., born in the summer heat with his father's blue eyes and the same cowlick of dark hair that all the Harrington men seemed to possess. As she gazed out at her family, the family she had never dared hope for during those dark days in Broken Creek, Tess felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Jeb Morris was serving a life sentence in the territorial prison. The Silver Dollar Saloon had burned to the ground in a lightning strike that many townspeople viewed as divine justice. And Tess had received a letter just last week from one of the former saloon girls, now happily married to a shopkeeper in Denver. Life on the frontier was never easy. There were still hardships, drought years when the crops suffered, harsh winters that tested their endurance, the constant challenges of raising 5 children in the wilderness. But with Zach by her side, Tess faced each day with courage and hope. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Harrington," Zach said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Tess leaned back against his solid strength, savoring the familiar scent of leather, prairie grass, and the distinctive masculine essence that was uniquely Zach. "Just counting my blessings," she replied. "And finding there are too many to count." Zach pressed a kiss to the sensitive spot just below her ear, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Speaking of blessings, Mrs. Fairchild has offered to watch the children this evening, all of them." His voice held a suggestive note that, even after a year of marriage, still made Tess's heart race. "Has she now?" Tess turned in his arms, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "And what did you have in mind for this rare evening alone, Mr. Harrington?" Zach's blue eyes darkened with desire. "I thought we might take a ride to the creek, the one with the swimming hole. The water's still warm enough and the moon will be full tonight." "Scandalous," Tess teased, remembering their first swim together in that secluded spot shortly after their wedding. "What would the neighbors think?" "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming to have such a beautiful wife," Zach replied, his voice husky. "And they'd be right." Later that evening, as they lay on a blanket beside the creek, the stars spinning overhead in a vast celestial dance, Tess turned to her husband with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Zach asked, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her. "For everything. For taking in a frightened girl with a baby, for loving us both, for giving us a home and a family." She reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face, for saying those words that day. Zach smiled, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "My kids could use a mama," he quoted softly. "And I needed a family," Tess finished. "We found each other just when we needed to most." "That's how love works sometimes," Zach said, gathering her close. "It finds you when you've stopped looking, when you've given up hope. And then suddenly, there it is, like sunshine after a storm." As the moon rose over the Wyoming prairie, casting its silver light over the land that had become her home, Tess Harrington closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of thanks. For the man who had opened his heart and home to her and Tilly. For the children who had welcomed them with open arms. For the life they had built together, rich with love and laughter. She had once believed that no one would want a girl with a baby. But Zach Harrington had proven her wrong. He had wanted not just her, but the chance to build something beautiful together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by courage, and by love. And in the end, that was the greatest blessing of all.